Your soulmate may be leaving next week. The real reason could surprise you, beloved. Something is shifting around the person you love, and if you have felt an unusual distance in their energy lately, do not rush to assume it means what your fear is telling you it means. There is a reason your soulmate may be leaving next week, a reason they have shared only partially with the people around them, and what makes this situation so complicated is that from the outside it can look almost exactly like someone trying to escape. Plans are being changed. Certain responsibilities are being handed over. There may already be conversations about when they are going, how long they will be away, what they need to take with them, and whether they intend to return to the same routine afterward. But beloved, the surprising truth is that this departure may have far less to do with wanting distance from you than with finally recognizing what they have been doing with the distance that already exists between you. For a long time, your soulmate has been able to live in a strange emotional middle ground. They could tell themselves the relationship had changed, that the past belonged to the past, that whatever existed between you had become too complicated to touch again, and yet they never had to experience what complete separation actually felt like. Your world was still close enough to theirs that traces of you remained everywhere. Perhaps there were familiar places, shared circles, routines that once overlapped, or simply the knowledge that you were somewhere within reach if circumstances ever created an excuse to cross paths. They did not have to contact you to feel that the possibility of you still existed. They could remain silent while privately carrying the comforting idea that nothing was truly final because the distance between you was emotional, not absolute. And beloved, that possibility became a kind of hidden shelter for them. Your soulmate may not have understood this until recently. They believed they were being disciplined by staying away. They told themselves that not reaching out was proof they were respecting the situation, protecting you, protecting themselves, or allowing life to reveal what was meant to happen without forcing anything. Some of that may have been sincere. But something else was happening beneath it. They were still arranging parts of their emotional life around your existence. They noticed when there was a chance you might be somewhere. They became more alert when somebody mentioned your name. They could walk into a familiar environment claiming not to expect you and still feel their body react to the possibility that you might appear. They were not consciously chasing you, beloved, but neither had they truly released the comfort of knowing that chance could do what courage had not. Perhaps you felt this contradiction yourself. Your soulmate could remain distant for weeks or months and then seem suddenly affected by the smallest encounter. A brief look, an unexpected mention, a familiar place, or some ordinary moment could bring an intensity back to the surface that did not match the story they had been telling themselves about being finished. They might become warmer and then pull away again. They might seem curious about your life while carefully avoiding questions that would reveal too much. Perhaps you wondered why someone who appeared so determined to maintain distance remained so emotionally responsive whenever the distance was interrupted. Beloved, the answer may be simpler than either of you realized. Distance had protected them from having to choose, but proximity had protected them from having to grieve. That combination can keep a person suspended for a very long time. They can say, "I am not going back," without ever having to say, "I am truly letting go." They can avoid a conversation while still allowing accidental reminders to reassure them that the connection exists somewhere outside the silence. And for your soulmate, This may have become so familiar that they stopped noticing how much emotional energy it required. Then something happened recently that exposed the pattern. Maybe they found themselves changing a plan because there was a possibility you would be present. Perhaps they agreed to attend something for reasons they could not honestly explain and then realized afterward that some part of them had simply hoped to see you. Maybe the opposite happened. They avoided somewhere because they feared seeing you and having every feeling they had contained return at once. Whatever the exact moment was, beloved, your soulmate recognized something they could no longer dismiss. They were still allowing your possible presence to make decisions for them even while insisting that the connection no longer had that kind of influence. This realization did not make them angry with you. You were not asking them to arrange their life around you. In many cases, you may not even have known any of this was happening. They became unsettled with themselves. They saw that they had created a life in which they could remain emotionally attached without accepting the responsibility of either rebuilding the connection or genuinely releasing it. And somewhere inside that realization came the thought that is now connected to next week. They need to step outside the environment that has allowed them to confuse nearness with connection. Beloved, this is where the real reason for their leaving begins to emerge. Your soulmate may have an opportunity to spend time somewhere else, perhaps connected to work, study, family obligations, a temporary project, a personal commitment, or simply a change they had previously resisted. The details can vary, but the emotional reason they finally said yes may be very different from what everyone assumes. People around them may believe they are seeking a fresh start. Someone may have joked that getting away will help them forget you. Perhaps even your soulmate has allowed that explanation to stand because it is easier than telling people what they are actually trying to understand. But beloved, they are not leaving primarily to forget you. They are leaving because they need to know who they are when the possibility of accidentally finding you is removed. Read that carefully. For perhaps the first time, your soulmate is preparing to live in a place where they cannot rely on coincidence. They cannot tell themselves maybe your paths will cross. They cannot enter a familiar space and secretly wonder whether you will be there. They cannot use the geography of your shared history as a substitute for actually making a decision about what they feel. If they miss you there, the missing will belong entirely to them. If they want to speak to you, there will be no accidental encounter to hide behind. If they decide they want another chance, they will have to reach deliberately. And if they discover that what they were holding was only attachment to familiarity, they will have to admit that too. This frightens your soulmate more than they expected. Because deep down, beloved, they may already suspect what will happen. They have tested distance before, but never without leaving themselves small escape routes. They could say they were moving on while remaining emotionally near enough to feel your presence. They could tell themselves they did not need you and then receive an unexpected reminder that temporarily satisfied the part of them that still longed for you. Now those small comforts may disappear. And there is a question growing louder inside them: what if I leave and discover that the feeling follows me? That question is powerful because your soulmate has spent so much time explaining the connection through circumstances. Bad timing. Too much pressure. Too many complications. The wrong environment. Too much history. Perhaps they believed that if enough external things changed, the internal attachment would eventually change too. But beloved, what if they reach somewhere entirely new and your memory remains exactly where it has always been? What if they wake in a different room, walk unfamiliar streets, speak with people who know nothing about you, and still find themselves wanting to tell you something at the end of the day? What if the absence of familiar reminders does not erase you but makes the distinction between memory and genuine longing impossible to avoid? Your soulmate may be secretly afraid of the opposite outcome too. What if they leave and finally feel peaceful? What if the emotional intensity decreases once the environment changes? Beloved, that possibility frightens them because even pain can become precious when it is one of the last things connecting us to someone we loved. Your soulmate may not be proud of this, but part of them has held on to the ache because the ache proved you mattered. To feel nothing would mean facing a different kind of loss. And perhaps that is why this departure is emotionally larger than it appears. They are not only stepping away from a familiar place. They are removing one of the excuses that has allowed them to postpone learning what remains when everything external is stripped away. But beloved, there is something else happening here, and this is where the story becomes more personal for you. Your soulmate has begun thinking about how unfair this emotional suspension may have been to your heart. They remember periods when they gave you just enough warmth to reopen hope, sometimes without intending to. Perhaps an unexpected conversation became deeply emotional. Maybe they looked at you in a way that made everything you had tried to release feel alive again. Then fear returned, and your soulmate retreated to the same distance they had occupied before. For them, these moments were proof the connection was still meaningful. For you, they may have been destabilizing. Your soulmate may finally be understanding that they could afford to romanticize uncertainty because you were often the one paying the heavier emotional cost. They could interpret an intense encounter as something beautiful and then return to silence. You might spend days trying to understand whether the encounter meant anything had changed. They could reassure themselves that the bond remained alive. You were left asking whether alive meant available, whether feeling meant intention, whether connection meant movement. Beloved, those are not the same things, and perhaps your soulmate is only now beginning to appreciate how painful it was to repeatedly give you emotional evidence without practical clarity. There is one particular realization that may have pushed them toward leaving next week more than anything else. Your soulmate remembered something you once said, perhaps in frustration, perhaps quietly after you had become tired of arguing. You may have told them, "Sometimes I think you like knowing I'm here more than you actually know how to be with me." At the time, that sentence may have hurt them. They may have interpreted it as an accusation that their feelings were fake. Perhaps they defended themselves by listing all the ways they cared. But beloved, you were not necessarily saying the love was false. You were questioning whether the comfort of your availability had become easier for them to maintain than the vulnerability of truly choosing you. That sentence means something different to them now. Your soulmate is asking whether they have been keeping you emotionally present without intentionally building anything with you. Even if there has been no contact, perhaps they have been keeping the idea of you nearby. They imagine someday speaking, someday explaining, someday being different, someday circumstances would become easier. Beloved, someday, can become one of the most comfortable hiding places in love. It allows someone to feel devoted without becoming accountable to the present. Your soulmate could continue believing the connection mattered deeply while postponing every question that would reveal whether they were actually capable of honoring it. And next week may remove that hiding place. Because your soulmate has made a private agreement with themselves about this departure, something they may not have told anyone else. They are not planning to use the time away to monitor you from a distance. They do not want to ask mutual people whether you miss them. They do not want to create mysterious posts hoping you notice they have left. They do not want to disappear dramatically so you become afraid of losing them. Beloved, the most surprising part may be this: they are trying to stop using your reaction as the measurement of what they should do. For a long time, your soulmate may have looked toward you for emotional evidence. If you reached out, they knew you cared. If you became distant, they panicked. If you seemed happy without them, they questioned whether they had lost their chance. If you appeared hurt, they felt guilty and moved closer, only to retreat once the guilt softened. Without realizing it, your responses became part of the mechanism governing their courage. But real clarity cannot depend entirely on whether another person is pulling you toward it. Your soulmate may finally understand that if they choose you again, they need to choose you from their own grounded truth, not because your longing reassures them or your absence frightens them. Beloved, that is a major shift, but it is not yet proof. Do not confuse awareness with transformation. A person can understand their pattern beautifully and still repeat it the next time vulnerability becomes uncomfortable. The fact that your soulmate is leaving does not obligate you to wait for what they discover. You are not an experiment awaiting their conclusion. You are not supposed to suspend your life while another person goes somewhere else to decide whether your connection is real enough. If you have spent too long waiting for certainty from someone who kept asking for more time, you have every right to continue forward whether they return clearer or not. And yet there is a deeper revelation, beloved, one your soulmate themselves may not fully understand yet. They may believe they are leaving to discover whether they can release you. But somewhere beneath that stated reason is another possibility. They are trying to discover whether they can finally choose you without needing you close enough to make the choice easy. There is an important difference. It is relatively easy to feel intense love when the person is physically present, when their face is in front of you, when their energy activates memory, chemistry, longing, and fear simultaneously. It is harder to ask, after the intensity disappears, what do I actually want to build? Your soulmate has lived for too long inside emotional reactions. They felt close, moved toward you. They felt afraid, moved away. They missed you, considered returning. They felt safer again, delayed. The connection became governed by whichever emotion was loudest in the moment. Beloved, perhaps the real purpose of their departure is to finally become still enough to separate emotion from decision. Not to become less loving, but more intentional. They need to know whether their desire for you remains when they are no longer being triggered by proximity, jealousy, memory, or the fear that someone else might have you. And there is one more thing they have been thinking about, something that may surprise you most of all. Your soulmate has imagined returning. Not necessarily returning to a place, beloved, but returning to you. They have imagined the conversation many times. Perhaps in the old version of that fantasy, they pictured themselves saying how much they missed you, how impossible forgetting you had been, how distance proved the depth of the bond. They imagined your expression softening. They imagined the emotional intensity itself carrying both of you across everything unresolved. But lately, that fantasy has changed. Now they imagine you asking a much harder question: what is different? Not, do you still love me? Not, did you miss me? Not, did you think about me while you were gone? What is different? And beloved, your soulmate may be leaving because they are terrified they do not yet have an answer strong enough to deserve your trust. Love is easy to describe after losing access to the person who inspired it. Change is harder. Your soulmate knows they cannot come back saying only, "I discovered I still want you." You already knew wanting existed. Wanting was never sufficient. They need to be able to say that when fear appeared, they learned not to punish closeness for causing it. That when they needed space, they learned to communicate rather than disappear. That when another person asked for consistency, they stopped treating the request as proof that freedom was being threatened. That when something mattered deeply enough to hurt, they stopped calling the pain a sign they should run. Perhaps this is why next week has begun to feel like a threshold inside them. Other people see a departure date. Your soulmate sees a confrontation with themselves. They may pack ordinary things, make practical arrangements, laugh when somebody asks whether they are excited, and appear calmer than they truly feel. But underneath those ordinary preparations lives an extraordinary question: when I remove every excuse, every familiar place, every accidental reminder, every opportunity to let coincidence speak for me, what truth will remain? Beloved, do not underestimate what this may reveal. They may discover that some of what they called love was attachment. That is possible. They may discover that some of what they called closure was avoidance. Also possible. They may discover both at once, that the relationship contained genuine love and unhealthy patterns, profound recognition and poor timing, deep emotion and insufficient capacity. Human truth is rarely as clean as the stories we tell ourselves after relationships end. And that same complexity belongs to you. You do not need to decide today what you would do if your soulmate returned. Perhaps you still love them. Perhaps part of you does and another part is finished. Maybe you would listen but never rebuild. Maybe the person you have become no longer wants what the person you were once begged for. Beloved, all of those possibilities are allowed. Your soulmate's awakening does not cancel your evolution. What matters is that if they contact you before leaving, you notice the difference between urgency and honesty. They may feel tempted to say, "I'm leaving next week, so we need to talk." Be careful with language that uses departure to manufacture pressure. If your soulmate has truly begun changing, they will not make the calendar responsible for your decision. They might say instead, "I'm going away next week, and something about leaving has made me understand a pattern I need to own. You do not have to respond before I go. I just didn't want to leave while continuing to pretend I don't understand what happened between us." That would be different. Not perfect. Different. And if they say nothing before leaving? Beloved, do not assume silence proves indifference. Perhaps they understand that one of their old habits was acting only when fear became extreme. If the threat of departure suddenly makes them desperate to confess everything, they may be asking themselves whether that confession would come from genuine readiness or simply from panic. Sometimes growth looks less dramatic than the movies teach us. Sometimes it means refusing to pull another person back into emotional intensity until you know what you are actually prepared to offer them. Your soulmate may leave next week carrying more questions than answers. They may expect the first nights away to feel freeing and discover instead that silence becomes louder when familiar distractions disappear. They may reach for their phone out of habit and stop. They may remember something you said years ago and finally hear it without defensiveness. Perhaps the distance will show them that what they miss most is not being wanted by you, but being known by you. Or perhaps they will discover that they miss the version of themselves that existed when they were brave enough to be honest in your presence. Beloved, if that happens, the real revelation will not be that your soulmate cannot live without you. You should never need another person's inability to function as proof of your value. The stronger revelation would be that they can live without you, and after facing that truth honestly, still choose to build with you if you freely choose them to. Need is not the highest form of love. Choice is. Maybe that is the lesson next week is bringing closer. Your soulmate has spent too long wondering whether losing you would destroy them. Now life may be asking a different question. If you do not need to be rescued from loneliness, protected from regret, or reassured by their continued availability, do you still choose this person clearly? And beloved, your soulmate may finally be preparing to answer that question without using your presence to help them. For you, there is nothing you need to chase before they leave. You do not need to create a dramatic final meeting. You do not need to make yourself unforgettable. If the connection mattered, it does not require a performance to become meaningful. Let your soulmate experience the consequences of their own choices without rescuing them from every uncomfortable emotion those consequences produce. Let distance reveal whatever distance reveals. Most importantly, remain inside your own life. Because perhaps the most beautiful outcome is not that your soulmate goes away and realizes they cannot stop thinking about you. Perhaps the beautiful outcome is that somewhere far enough from every old excuse, they finally understand that your love was never asking them to remain physically close. It was asking them to become emotionally present. And if they return after next week, or weeks later, or sometime after the noise inside them has quieted, do not ask first whether they missed you. Watch whether they can finally do what the old version of them could not. Can they speak without being forced by crisis? Can they stay when the conversation becomes vulnerable? Can they allow your answer to be different from the one they hope for? Can they choose you without requiring you to chase them into choosing? Because, beloved, the real reason your soulmate may be leaving next week is not necessarily that they have decided to leave you behind. They may be trying to leave behind the version of themselves that kept loving you from a safe distance, the version that remained close enough to feel the connection, but never brave enough to fully enter it. And perhaps the greatest surprise is that for the first time, they are beginning to understand something you may have known all along, the distance between two people is not measured by miles. Sometimes two people can stand in the same room and remain worlds apart. And sometimes someone has to go far enough away to finally decide whether they are willing to come back differently.